Election Day went smoothly for the most part in San Diego County at least. The results brought smiles and cheers from the winners, uncertainty for others, and some predictable outcomes as well as a surprise or two. We analyze the results and ask what they mean for the November general election. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, Michael Smolens, columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune, David Garrick, who covers City Hall for the Union Tribune, KPBS investigative reporter Amitha Sharma, and freelance journalist Seth Coombs. Well, rarely has the smart money looked so dumb. A week ago, the Democratic nomination for president was Bernie Sanders to lose. Sanders was surging, Joe Biden's campaign was on life support, and many among the chattering class were looking forward to Super Tuesday, maybe a knockout blow. But not so fast. Biden won big in South Carolina last Saturday and used the Tuesday vote across more than a dozen states to forge a comeback for the ages. Gone now are Amy Klobuchar, Michael Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, looks like we learned to pronounce his name for nothing, and Elizabeth Warren. So Amitha, start us off here. Give us your take on the big open question, what happened?
Well, Sam Clyburn happened, triggering a series of events that none of us could have predicted. When Sam Clyburn, the Democratic congressman from South Carolina, endorsed Joe Biden last week.
Jim Clyburn. Yeah.
Jim Clyburn.
Yeah.
None of us could have predicted the profound effect it would have had on South Carolina voters. I think we all knew, we all understood that Joe Biden was going to take South Carolina, but we didn't know by how much. But Clyburn did. He has said that he knew that the people in his state were waiting for him to weigh in on who he thought could beat Donald Trump in November. And so voters in South Carolina ended up giving Joe Biden a huge victory. I think he won 30% more of the vote than Bernie Sanders did. And then I think from that point on, a clarion call went out from South Carolina. And the first people to hear that call were Democratic presidential candidates, Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. They drop out of the race. They know that they haven't made inroads with black voters, but they don't just drop out of the race. They very quickly get behind Joe Biden. And then
I think it's crucial that it was before Super Tuesday.
Right before. So,
and you'd think they'd spent all that time on Super Tuesday. They wouldn't want to give up their chance to see how they would do. But I think they felt like the party greater good.
Right. And I think that what happened from that point on was very psychological. Voters in the Super Tuesday states stopped and said, well, if these rivals, former rivals, can get behind Biden, then maybe we should choose him too. They go on to give him a victory in 10 of the 14 states. So I think that Clyburn's endorsement, the huge victory in South Carolina, the follow-up endorsements by Pete Buttigieg and Warren brought a sense of clarity.
But I think it's key, too. It's not just any two people who endorsed him, but it was the two other major moderates. So it really consolidated the moderates behind one person. It wasn't Warren or Sanders. Obviously, it wouldn't be Sanders.
But no polling to show all of this, Michael. It was just happened so fast, as Amitha's saying.
Well, it shows how sort of fluid and, I guess, thin in a certain way Sanders' support was in South Carolina. They were even thinking they might overtake Biden. Some polls showed him really close. A close loss would not have, had the effect that this has had. But Biden really ran away with it. And as everybody's saying, the establishment kind of coalesced behind Biden. That early endorsement was by those two was pretty particular and interesting. But I think what happened is it just signaled to a lot of voters whose primary thing is to who can beat Trump, and they always thought Biden early on. I mean, remember, just for poll after poll showed him ahead, and then he just got into trouble, and suddenly that snapped back. We'll see where it goes from here.
And Trump certainly thought so. Pelosi will argue you got yourself impeached going after Biden with the whole Ukraine.
I think the first step might have been to go back one step farther, as Biden had that strong showing in the debate leading up to all this, because I think prior to that he had stumbled in some debates and maybe not have been impressive, and he was more aggressive that night, and I think maybe that was the first step of this.
But we still thought that Biden's victory in South Carolina was going to be narrow, as you pointed out, and we still thought it was going to be isolated to South Carolina, that it would not hold through Super Tuesday.
Because of the big
and we didn't think those other moderate candidates would drop out and get behind him that quickly.
I think it's a little overstated. I mean, I don't think that I wasn't surprised by the results of Super Tuesday at all. I think that Biden won the states that he was expected to win, especially with Klobuchar and Buttigieg dropping out. So that being said, like I think that there is a sense of the media, creating like this headline that Biden's back, or it's now Biden's nomination. And
but do you think Biden was expected to win?
In other words, if the media keeps saying he can win, then people are voting for him because they think he can win. I don't think anybody really is.
But 2 weeks ago we were talking about Sanders having the.
Well, that's it. After Nevada, they were saying Sanders
absolutely.
his to lose. Yeah.
Well, it didn't just shift the narrative. It shifted. The votes have shifted. I mean, it changed dramatically. And the question we'll find out, because who wants to project into the future as to what's happened in just the last week? Right. But the question will be: is there sort of a ceiling on Sanders' support? We've got Michigan coming up, and is it Jennifer Granholm, the former Michigan governor?
She has, but more importantly, the current Michigan governor has supported, who's now a popular Democrat.
Biden. Yeah. But also Florida, and I think that's where Bernie Sanders really has problems. We'll see what happens in Michigan, but polls show Biden way ahead in Florida.
Why do you think that is in Florida?
There's a substantial African-American vote, and we know how well he does and he has always had support there. I think also the Cuban-American vote, because Sanders has had that history with Cuba and
that misstatement on 60 Minutes.
And I just think that plus Biden's been around.
Let's shift it back to turnout here. Now, California's kind of notoriously slow in counting votes. San Diego County is slow. Turnout was encouraging for Democrats in a lot of these states we're talking about, but we really don't even know the turnout in California or San Diego County.
Well, we've got an idea, at least in San Diego County, and I think you could find out, get an idea in the statewide, but San Diego County had, 350,000 votes to count after Election Day. And
still to count.
And it's down to like 290 now, and every day they update it. But I think if you add up the ballots left to be counted with the ones that have counted, they're looking at about 47%, give or take, which isn't bad for a primary. I mean, usually primaries have been deadly low in the past.
But in Virginia, Texas, boy, the turnout was way up.
How it goes statewide, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Well, I made the point earlier, though. I feel like because it moved from June to March, there may have been some folks who maybe weren't aware of it. That may have been part of the reason. I know Sanders was frustrated that he didn't get as many young voters to come out in California as he had hoped, and he won California, but maybe not as by wide a margin as he expected.
How did he do in San Diego County, Sanders and Biden? And
about 3% Biden?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Sanders beat Biden by about 3%, I think.
Yeah, 3 to 4%.
And nobody's mentioned the fact that a lot of us, went and voted early, and maybe voted for.
I think the race was
closer to 8%.
It was very interesting because a lot of Buttigieg people were saying, oh, can I have a do-over because they mailed the ballot in early? But I think as the vote count continues, I mean, Sanders has won California, quote unquote, but there's a lot of votes to be counted, and that may affect the delegate distribution.
Right, he's not going to get this big haul we were even talking about.
My point is, in terms of turnout, a lot of people were holding on to their ballots late because they wanted to see what happened, and some people that didn't have sort of regrets.
I know I did. I held on to mine a little bit longer than I thought.
Amitha, as the woman on the panel, I did want to bring up Elizabeth Warren. Of course, she has since dropped out, not before like the other candidates had before the election, but did on a couple days ago. So what happened there? I mean, she was surging, and recently as October, she was seen as the national frontrunner in Iowa.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of debate about that over the past 24 hours. Was she too progressive, too liberal? For Bernie Sanders voters, was she not liberal enough? I think we should probably discuss this in the larger context of women presidential candidates. I mean, you could say that about all of them. Were they too centrist? Were they too much to the right? I think the more insightful conversation is to talk about how we perceive women in the United States. I mean, we have enough faith in them to elect them to be U.S. senators, to elect them to be congressional representatives. We're fine with them sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mayor, governor, sure.
But there's something about the office of the presidency of the United States that's the most powerful position in the world. And we, I think, as a society, associate power with masculinity. in a way that other countries in Europe and in Asia don't. They're able to transcend gender in a way that we're not. I remember back in 2016, on Election Day, I watched an interview with a black voter who was a Democrat. She said she voted for Trump because she didn't think a woman could be president and make the right decisions, make the right calls, because women were too emotional.
One not dissenting view, as I said last week, but let's not forget Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, despite what Trump says. It wasn't apportioned properly. You can sort of make the alternative reality argument that there was a lot of missteps in that campaign by misjudging what their momentum was going into the election.
Right.
Had they done some things differently, had she won, we might have a different conversation.
And
I often wonder if Barack Obama didn't win, what would that mean for black candidates?
Right.
It probably would be another threshold.
All right, we're going to have to leave that one there because I want to come back to San Diego now. We got a lot to get to. Let's bring it back home. Race to succeed, Mayor Kevin Faulconer, Democrat top Gloria tops the field. As expected, tight race for second. Where are we right now, David?
Well, we thought we had a runoff between Democrat Todd Gloria, who got more than 40% of the vote in a 6-candidate field, which is pretty remarkable. We thought it was going to be him and Republican Scott Sherman, and it still looks like that's the case. But after the first dump of late arriving ballots, Barbara Bree closed the gap on Sherman significantly, by like 30%. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see between now and April 2nd whether she can continue to close the gap. If she continues at the rate she did yesterday, she actually would pass him. But you don't know where those votes were from. So
Quickly, you referenced April 2nd. Explain that to us.
That's the deadline that the Registrar of Voters has to certify the election results. It's exactly 1 month after Election Day. So they probably won't take all the way till then, but with this many votes, 290,000 still to count, it might take close to that long.
So Bree fought hard, Michael, and just a little short if these results hold.
Yeah, and we'll see, because as I just said, that a lot of Democrats were holding on to their ballots, and certainly some of those will go to Todd Gloria, maybe some will go to Scott Sherman. But remember, it's not, she doesn't have to catch up to Todd Gloria. She has to catch up to Scott Sherman, and if Sherman made his big appeal to Republicans probably voted early because they were voting for Trump and Sherman, and there wasn't much of a question there. So it'll be interesting just to see if that sort of late effect has it. But one just thing about her, that she just got caught in the middle. It was going to be her and Gloria down the well, and I think she was struggling to find, okay, what's her lane and what's her theme. She sort of went from the kind of entrepreneur, very competent, great resume, and some city hall experience, to kind of morphing into the neighborhood protection. I hesitate to use the word NIMBY thing because I don't think that's quite accurate, but suddenly it became more of a development issue that I think, well, if she gets into the general election, we'll hear a lot.
You can see her throughout the campaign kind of struggling to hone her message and maybe adjust it.
Right. But no, it's surprising because if you look at the results, and I know we're going to talk about Measure A and B in a minute, but like if you look at the results from those measures, San Diego still seems to be in this NIMBY kind of mindset, which you would think would translate to votes for Bree, but I didn't see it. I mean, she ran, in my opinion, a very excellent campaign in the regard that she really did separate herself from Gloria, but with 4 Democrats in the race and 1 Republican, it just wasn't enough.
Too nuanced,
if you believe in moral victories, I mean, I don't know if any of us do, but Barbara Bree, she really faced, Labor went against her and chose Gloria, even though they were very similar ideologically. The Democratic Party went against her, even though they were very similar, on a lot of issues.
They really ditched her.
Exactly, and so for her to actually be this close and get 23.5% of the vote, I mean, I guess you could argue that's a moral victory. I don't know what it's worth, but.
So I do have a quick question, though. If Barbara Bree makes it into the runoff, or actually if she doesn't make it into the runoff, do the people who supported her vote for Sherman, or do they vote for Gloria?
Think Gloria, I had a political scientist tell me this would be a historic margin of victory. I mean, if it's Gloria and Sherman, it seems like Gloria could get 70% of the vote. I mean, I don't want to be held to that, but it seems like that's very possible. Because it's not just that Sherman is a Republican like Faulconer. Sherman is the most right-wing Republican on the council. He wouldn't have done the climate action plan like Faulconer. So I just feel like if the voters are aware of the differences between these two candidates based on registration and ideology, I think Gloria would win by a mile.
Let's talk about the council here. Several council races on Tuesday. How's that shaping up, and what's the council maybe going to look like if you do have a new Democrat?
Well, let's talk just in general. We have 5 new council members no matter what, basically. So, I mean, there's a lot of open seats. So it's going to look very different.
Out of 9, we should say.
Right.
So
5 out of 9, exactly, yes. And basically, you had three. You're going to have three progressive Democrats, three races where progressive Democrats will face each other in November, and then you're going to have two sort of old-fashioned Republican versus Democrat battles in two districts that used to be safely Republican, but because since Trump, even before that, but especially since Trump, registration in San Diego has shifted and it's become more of a blue city. So you have two sort of inland suburban districts that used to be Republican that are now might go to Democrats. And I would say the only surprise on Tuesday night was that Democrats actually were the first place finishers ahead of the Republicans in those two races.
Very surprising.
Which very surprising, especially District 7 in particular, because you had one Republican against three Democrats. So you'd figure the Republican would finish first. He still finished second. So that was pretty surprising.
Against a newcomer, too.
Right.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, I just want to echo everything you said. Like, I was very surprised to see, like Marnie von Wilpert, win. And I remember profiling her, about 5 or 6 months ago, and was very impressed with her. But also, being a pragmatic, objective person that I am sometimes, I did not give her a really good chance. And to see her finish first in that district again, Mark Kersey's seat, pretty safe, kind of. I know he switched to being independent or whatever, but
future. Then.
It's not. It would not be shocking to see the city council be 8-1 Democrat.
Almost regardless of what happens, the Democratic majority is going to increase as it has been over time on the San Diego City Council. I mean, I'm not that old that it used to be a Republican City Council.
I still get that from people around the state and around the country.
But I think what we're saying, we talk about the partisan differences and so forth. Now we're going to be looking at the nuanced differences among Democrats, and there's sort of the progressive and moderate, but then it comes down to growth issues, which don't always fall on neatly on partisan lines. So it'll be an interesting aspect, and for the next mayor, which probably is going to be Todd Gloria, maybe not, but you'll have a Democratic mayor, or if Barbara Bree gets in, dealing with the Democratic council, but that doesn't mean everything's going to be copacetic.
No, but I think it's a key point to make that we've had divided government for quite a while. Since the Democratic majority's been in place, you have a Republican mayor, and you're going to have very likely a Democratic mayor. So coupling that with a 7-2 or an 8-1 Democratic majority, there's an opportunity. I don't know if they'll take it. I don't know if they'll do it well, but there's an opportunity for them to really change a lot of things.
Well, let's shift over to Congress right now. We talked a lot about the show. We had two really interesting races here, 53rd and the 50th districts. And in the 53rd, Sarah Jacobs had a big night, followed by Georgette Gomez. So Dave, do you think two Democrats battling it out in November, the differences there?
I don't know. I mean, I think Georgette did poorly. I think even though they both made the runoff, I think the gap between them, surprised a lot of people. It's kind of a weird situation where Susan Davis announced she was resigning kind of suddenly. People started to announce they were going to run kind of out of nowhere. I don't think Georgette had the time to mount a strong campaign. Maybe this extra 8 months she has now will help. But I think if you look at the results on Tuesday, I think she's got to be pretty discouraged.
Well, and I mean, let's face it, Sarah Jacobs had, a deep well of money. The Jacobs family and her grandfather, the co-founder of Qualcomm.
And she was seasoned by running in a race before.
Yeah, she's been involved. She's not a neophyte. And I think even though that was up in North County, I think that name identification, there was a lot of regional media on that, so she's not an unknown person. And just in a personal way, I have no real data on this, but I think that Jacobs' name is pretty good in this town. I don't know that they're beloved, but it's
big supporter of KPBS.
KPBS. I mean, they've had a lot of influence and employ a lot of people and done a lot in terms of moving technology. So I think all those things certainly helped her. Georgette Gomez does have 8 months. She started off a lot lower than we thought she did in certain polling. But the question is, what kind of support is she going to get? I mean, it's going to be a Democratic seat, and they're really not that much different on the big issues of facing Congress. And it's not where you would think the Democratic Party and whatever, are going to expend a lot of
money to help Georgette.
As much as they love Georgette Gomez, they got to save their fire more for partisan races.
Right.
And to Michael's point, I mean, these two people are going to be ostensibly applying for a job where they are going to have job security. I mean, barring some wonky redistricting or something like that after the census. Or a scandal or whatever. They are applying for a job that they are probably going to hold for at least 20, 30 years. So,
real quickly,
I mean, if they want it, where they don't run for another.
That's a great point.
Before we move to the 50th, real quickly, Janessa Goldbeck, openly gay, Marine veteran, a lot of media buzz. We talked about her on the show.
I think that just comes down to name recognition. I think she had ideas that really resonated with a lot of people, but people didn't know her in the way that they knew Georgette Gomez, they knew her name at least, and that they knew Sarah Jacobs' name.
It still was a surprisingly poor showing, I think. Weren't we surprised when we saw her
Well,
name as low as, no?
Yeah, but I think that the media has a little bit to do with that, not in a necessarily positive way. It certainly gave Janessa Goldbeck a lot of due attention because of the quality she brought and so forth, but I think that sort of elevated the expectation in our minds. And I think the same with Georgette Gomez. We cover City Hall very closely, and she's a city council president. There's a lot of that district that's not in the city of San Diego, and I don't know just how well known she was there, even though we think that she's sort of a big name.
All right, let me stay with you, Michael. Let's go over to the 50th here. Democrat looks way ahead on paper, but that can be misleading when we get into the general, right?
Well, Amar Kampa-Najjar, who did, came close to winning 2 years ago against the wounded, scandalized Representative Duncan Hunter, who has, of course, stepped down. He finished ahead of the pack, but it's a very Republican district. Darrell Issa looks to be the person that's going to be on the ballot. We know a lot about him. He was in Congress for 18 years. He's got deep pockets. He knows how to run a very tough, and in this case, it was a pretty ugly campaign.
Mostly against Carl DeMaio.
Against Carl DeMaio, yeah. The race really was for second place. But the total Republican vote, and I forget the percentage, is considerably more than what Kampa-Najjar got. Do all those votes flow to Issa? Probably not, but most of them probably will. So the expectation is it's going to be Darrell Issa back in Congress again.
But there is something interesting in that district, and this is an obscure poll that might have come out in your newspaper in January, and it asked voters in that district what were the most important issues to them in a congressional candidate. And they said character. They said character combined with two contradictory lines of thought. One was they wanted someone who would hold the president accountable, and then they wanted someone who would rally around the president. I do wonder if there is a tug of war among some Republicans in that district that might just give Amar Kampa-Najjar a chance.
Who's running as a real moderate.
I mean, he of course has a chance, but just the dynamics aren't set up to him. You raised some good things, but points. I think it's parsing the vote in 2018 and how he did. A lot of Republican voters probably were disgusted with
the indictment
Hunter and went to him. Democrats were looking at some early numbers in this race and said, they like Amar, he's done a great job, done a good job fundraising, but if he runs against anybody against Duncan Hunter, he's probably not going to win. But, who knows what will happen between now and November, because...
To your point, if he can't win against a scandal-plagued...
How can he beat Issa?
Exactly. Issa, who has so much experience and a lot of money.
Issa has hitched his wagon to Trump, and who knows whether that goes up or down.
Right.
All right. But Issa doesn't live in the district.
And it may be, I'll just have
might count.
The last word on that district. It may be sayonara for Carl DeMaio here. He's had a string of losses in a row now. Let's go to our measures here and take them one by one. Measure C, tax increase on tourists here. Needed 2/3 majority, fell short. David, is that high bar? Is this going to be challenged in court maybe?
Potentially.
Got to rethink this high bar of supermajorities?
I think you have to get the voters to rethink it. I don't know, but there's a Supreme Court ruling that gives them some hope. I don't know from a story.
Supreme Court ruling.
Right, correct. State Supreme Court. A colleague of mine, Lori Weisberg, wrote a story yesterday that I think that the folks behind this are probably not going to focus on that. You don't know. Maybe they're going to focus on what's maybe the next effort, because they really feel the expansion of the convention center is crucial. I guess it's surprising considering that this had support on both sides and support, pretty much all the support you can have with very limited opposition, and it still didn't get to 2/3 in San Diego.
Just barely, Michael.
It's very close.
64%.
I was sort of surprised. It did really well, and I think when the final votes are counted, it's going to be just a hair short, so they're going to be very frustrated. But the rules is rules, and it's unfortunate. I think that you were hinting at that. Will there ever be a reconsideration? I mean, is that
landslide
just too
majority,
hot of a
not
bar?
a supermajority, 60-40, something
but
like
it's
that.
it's tied into Prop 13 and the anti-tax movement. It's very difficult.
So you don't buy into the narrative that some people are speculating about it being challenged in court, and
it may be. We'll just have to see. But I think that what David also was alluding to is that. Yeah. That's going to be a long, hard slog.
Sure.
And there are cases that are kind of moving ahead on whether the Citizens Initiative, which this is, should only take a simple majority, but there wasn't a clear ruling at the Supreme Court, one that did sort of open the door, so it could take a while. And, they're debating that. They certainly laid this out in a way challenge that, but we'll just have to see if that
Because the city didn't
Yeah.
do it, and it was volunteers.
Right.
They would have to raise enough money to handle the legal costs for it, which could be millions and millions.
Somebody asked me like, what's next as far as like the convention center expansion, and I didn't really know how to answer it. Do you guys?
I think that they're going to have to reassess and
Yeah.
just take a look at that whole area there, because there's also going to be, even if they got that far, we know people just are adamantly opposed to expanding on the waterfront.
Sure.
So there's lots of hurdles.
Let's talk a little bit about the what I call the urban sprawl measures, A and B. Kind of confusing how the
it
voters
was-
split on that stuff.
Yeah, it was very confusing for a lot of voters. I think that, this one to me was the most surprising. It was almost as if San Diego voters said, no, I don't want more development, and also don't ask me to vote on these things anymore. It was like they wanted one thing, but because the narrative was like, oh, hey, like if you vote yes on one, you should vote no on the other. And
As you
vice
pointed out,
versa.
Seth, it's like an anti-development spirit.
Right. And again, like the NIMBY spirit, is still a little there, and the YIMBYs hasn't really caught on. I don't know. I mean, I think there is.
This is even
Or
lockstep
the-
with our politicians who
Yeah.
are all about more housing.
Right.
The other interpretation, though, is that I think voters possibly got a little bit more sophisticated. They thought, well, it is a little absurd for all of us across the county to be voting anytime the Board of Supervisors votes in a huge housing development project that amends the general plan. However, there is this particular one north of Escondido that we don't like.
I think that there's also something to be said for these that are still, at least Measure A is still really close.
And you get the last word, and we're going to have plenty more shows as we go on to November. We are out of time. That was a lightning round. Thank you all very much. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens and David Garrick of the San Diego Union Tribune, Amitha Sharma of KPBS News, and freelance journalist Seth Coombs. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today, and join us again next Friday on the Roundtable.
Shout it out, make a choice and raise your hand. Take a vote and count it out. Your vote is worth counting. Come on and vote for your favorite thing. The group with the most votes wins. Think that you wanna steal or do the hula hoop. Let's all take a vote and see. Hula hoop's just one. Make a choice and raise your hand. Make a choice and shout it out.